Yeah,
Coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for Wednesday, April 10th, 2019. I'm Ray Baker in for Roland. He's on the Tom Joyner Morning Show cruise. Trump backer Candace Owens shows off her ignorance again, this time in front of Congress. We'll take her to school. Maxine Waters versus Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. Guess who won? We've got the video. Another Trump nominee won't say Brown versus the Board of Education is settled law. What's going on with these people? Are they keeping their options open? And Go-Go Music versus T-Mobile. A D.C. phone store which played Go-Go music on the loudspeakers outside the store for years was forced to stop. But now, the music keep on playing. Florida's constitutional amendment to restore voting rights to the formerly incarcerated is still under attack. But there is a plan to go national to restore voting rights to folks who have paid their debt to society. And you don't want to miss the video celebrating basketball player Dwayne Wade's other life as a great and generous human being. We dare you not to cry when you see it. It's time to bring the funk here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
I'm Ray Baker in for Roland. He's on the Tom Joyner Morning Show cruise. Yesterday's hearing on hate crimes and the rise of white nationalism before the full House Judiciary Committee continues to make waves. Unfortunately, it involves cleaning up the ignorance of Candace Owens. Owens is with the Trump PAC Turning Point USA. First question, of course, is why is she even called to testify at all? Why was she on the same panel as people as distinguished and informed as Kristen Clark, the CEO of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and Eva Patterson, president of the Equal Justice Society, both distinguished attorneys with decades of social justice work. Ms. Owens, on the other hand, attended but did not graduate from college and co-founded a marketing agency before coming to the attention of conservatives. Who asked her to testify, you might ask? One of the Republicans on the committee. Yesterday at the hearing, she was fed this question by one of the Republican members.
Ms. Owens, let me begin with you if I can. I think it's fair to say that you didn't start off on the conservative side of the ledger. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was a liberal.
Okay. And so just on a couple of issues, and you mentioned them in your statement, but just to go back to them, if you could tell us again kind of what they are and what hatred that you've experienced as a result of having this point of view. You mentioned the term Blexit. Would you describe what that is and what hate that you've experienced as a result of your position on that?
I launched a movement called Blexit, which is the black exit from the Democrat Party. When I became educated about the issues and stopped reacting emotionally, which is what the left wants us to do, presumably, when they hold up pictures of burning churches, I began to examine the facts and look at some of the narratives they were spinning. For example, in 2016, it was police brutality, and I realized that they are dissuading us against our own best interests. And I wanted to have a more productive dialogue with the black community about the issues that are actually affecting us and impacting us. When I announced that I was a conservative, I've never seen anything more racist, more disgusting, more vitriolic, more hate that's come my way in my entire life than the things that Democrats and the media say about me today. I've been referred to as an Uncle Tom, a bed wench. For those of you that don't know, that means a slave that sleeps with the master, a house nigger. And these are all words that have been said over and over again about black conservatives when they have the audacity to think for themselves and become educated about our history and the myth of things like the Southern switch and the Southern strategy, which never happened.
The myth of things. What caught most people's attention was her statement that the Southern switch or the Southern strategy never occurred. Spoiler alert, she's wrong. It did. Basically, the idea behind the Republican Southern strategy was that after a Democratic president, Lyndon Johnson, got the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act passed in 1964 and 65 respectively, that Southern whites would abandon the Democratic Party if, that is, Republicans could figure out a way to appeal to the white voters' racism. Legendary Republican operative Lee Atwater, he of the Willie Horton ad fame, laid out in this 1981 interview how Republicans use coded language to appeal to the racism of white Southern voters, something they're still doing today.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfire. So you say stuff like force busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than white. We want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger nigger.
Hard to believe that Howard University once wanted him on their board of trustees. On the panel today, we have A. Scott Bolden, former chair of the National Bar Association Political Action Committee, communication strategist Kelly Bethea, and Johanna LeBlanc, a national security and foreign affairs legal analyst. Welcome to all of you. Kelly, I'm going to start with you. When you hear the absurdity that we heard from Candace Owens, and she talks about that she's now facing racism, and she's alleging that there's a bit of reverse racism, how do you react or respond when you hear her say something like that?
You know, at this point, I can't tell whether she's gaslighting or whether she's actually ignorant, because it's just not true. It's just not true. Like, there's history about it, there's recordings about it, there's people who are still alive who can testify to the fact that this stuff happened. So, there are no words,
yeah, it's really
right? When it comes to, man, I'm speechless.
It's really difficult.
It's really, really hard. With her saying she's, you know, being discriminated against, I mean, in a sense she is, but it's not because of her skin color, it's because of her ignorance.
Right.
You know,
and we imagine that language such as bedwench and things like that has no place anywhere. But Johanna, I'm going to come to you next. Because my question there, as a black woman, do you see any identity politics there where you almost cringe thinking, oh no, please don't do this, sister, please don't?
Well, the fact of the matter is this was an opportunity to to discuss white nationalism, a real threat to America's democracy, to everyday people living in America. But instead, we use Candace Owens as a distraction, to distract from the entire agenda, from what was supposed to be discussed. And I'm disgusted because I think that members of Congress, they know better. We elected them in office so that they can address the issues impacting Americans, but instead they have used Candace Owens, someone who is not knowledgeable when it comes to the history of race relations in America, but instead they use her as a pawn to distract Americans.
They gave her a platform, though. They did, and the Republicans seem like they hijacked this hearing because what is the media doing? The media is focusing on Candace Owens and some of her outrageous statements, and we're not talking about the real intellectuals that were there, the real freedom fighters that were there, who really could give you statistics, chapter and verse on the rise of hate crimes, including white nationalism, white supremacy, who are the leading killers of police officers in this country over the last 10 to 25 years. In regard to Candace, I mean, she gets a lot of press because of what she says, but her press is rooted in her own ignorance, if you will. Candace Owens isn't being discriminated against. This is the ignorance part that you talked about, my colleague. Candace Owens isn't being discriminated against because she's a black woman who chooses to be a Republican. Everyone is free to choose their political party. She's not even being discriminated against. She's being criticized and called names and attacked because what she says is offensive and fundamentally incorrect. It's not a mistake. It's a purposeful error on her part. And so they twist the words to say that attacks on police officers are down or that the Southern strategy was not accurate. There's empirical data, documentary evidence to support this, and the piece that you just ran confirms that. But it also shows how it doesn't really matter to the Republicans what's right or wrong, what's truth or false. It's to get that message out, to talk to the core Republicans who believe in the nonsense, and many are as ignorant as those who put life to those words, like Candace.
Kelly, you work in communications, so I'm curious about your thought about this. If we're having a hearing on white nationalism and the violence around that, that's going to point back to President Trump. If Candace Owens gets out here and steals the headlines by being incompetently wrong in public, that now gets us not talking about this. Is there a chance this was deliberate?
Of course it was deliberate. Candace Owens has, for lack of a better phrase, been used as a token for the entirety of her time in the spotlight. You know, every time something happens with the Trump administration, Fox brings on Candace. Every time Trump says something absolutely absurd via tweet or news conference, what have you, they bring on Candace to bring on maybe like the black perspective of things that I don't know about other black people, but the black people that I know don't share that same perspective. So it's definitely a smoke and mirrors thing with her. I don't understand why she still, you know, allows herself to be used in this manner because it's really obvious. But it's definitely a communication strategy, no doubt.
But it's really rooted, again, in ignorance. So, for example, when Candace Owens says that, why aren't we here talking about ANIFA, for example? Or ANIFA is a far-left political party that wants balance and wants a more liberal view of the world at all costs, right? Violence, whether it's white nationalism or ANIFA, violence is wrong. But look at what their goal is. ANIFA's goal isn't a race war, isn't a black majority or a coalition of minority majority here. Their view is that we should be a much more liberal society. I'm not defending them. Then when you look at when they go against white nationalists, if you will, or the Nazi Party, who want a race war, who believe that America ought to stay the majority white, and that the immigration piece is really rooted in their racism, because the rhetoric you hear from the Nazis and the Nationalist Party and the Ku Klux Klan is the very rhetoric you hear from the White House. Then you understand that nationalism and Nazism is rooted in race. ANIFA is rooted in policy and how they view America.
Kelly, I'm going to give you one more chance to get in, then I want to hear from Joanna real quick, please.
Of course. Just brief correction, it's Antifa.
Antifa?
Antifa.
They spelled it wrong.
Antifa.
The
Antifa.
Yes. Yeah. Antifa.
Antifa.
Yeah.
Joanna, excuse me, I want to let you get the last word on this.
Yeah, so the whole notion that Candace Young is indicating that black people are persecuting her because of her political views, that is not true. Black people, we have folks with different views who are Republicans, who are Democrats, who are liberals, who are whatever. The issue is her ignorance and her comments, which have no facts to support them and it's impeding progress, because as we see, the media has been using her to promote their agenda, and they're doing a good job. The fact that we've been talking about her, they're doing a good job.
At the best, she's wildly uninformed, and that's the nicest thing we can say about her.
And that is dangerous.
And at the worst, she's manipulative and being willing to be used to subvert the intentions and the best practices of the United States.
Someone who is uninformed, has access to the media, is dangerous for America. It's actually a threat.
And won't debate Roland Martin.
Well,
she's been invited many times.
There are a number of people who won't debate Roland, probably because how bad it would look when they sit up here with them. One of those such people is Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. Now, Secretary Mnuchin was testifying in front of Congresswoman Maxine Waters' Financial Services Committee yesterday. And apparently, he had someplace to go that was more important than being in front of a congressional hearing. Haven't these folks learned that you don't mess with who we call Auntie Maxine?
Mr. Secretary, I want you to know that no other secretary has ever told us the day before that they were going to limit their time in the way that you're doing. So if you want to use them as examples, you have acted differently than they have acted, and as I have said, if you wish to leave, you may.
If you'd wish to keep me here so that I don't have my important meeting and continue to grill me, then we can do that. I will cancel my meeting and I will not be back here. I will be very clear if that's the way you'd like to have this relationship.
Thank you. The gentleman, the secretary, has agreed to stay to hear all of the rest of the members.
Okay,
please
so just
cancel your meeting
to the press.
and respect our time.
I am
Who is next on the list?
My foreign meeting. You're instructing me to stay here and I should cancel.
No, you just made me an offer.
No, I didn't make you an offer.
You made me an offer that I accepted.
I did not make you an offer. Just let's be clear. You're instructing me. You are ordering me to stay here.
No, I'm not ordering you. I'm responding. Okay. I said you may leave anytime you want. And you said, okay, if that's what you want to do, I'll cancel my appointment and I'll stay here. So I'm responding to your request. If that's what you want to do.
That's not what I want to do. I told you.
What would you like to do?
What I've told you is I thought it was respectful that you'd let me leave at 5:15.
You are free to leave anytime you want. You may go anytime you want.
Please dismiss everybody. I believe you're supposed to take the gravel and bang it. That's
Please do not instruct me as to how I'm to conduct this committee. Please, gentle lady, the time belongs to the chair.
There's so many places to start there. That is so gloriously terrible. Gloriously terrible is the best way I can describe that. Johanna, please lead us in where you're going with this, because it seems like a petulant back and forth of wordsmanship between the secretary and the chairwoman about, no, I didn't say you could leave. Yes, I said you could leave. You told me I had to stay. What was your reading of that?
The fact of the matter is, my position on this is, I think this back and forth happened because of sexism in America. Let's just be real. I think that if Auntie Maxine Waters were a man, I think the dialogue would have been much different. And sexism, it's a real issue in America. When you are a woman, you have to fight 10 times harder. You have to work harder than your male counterparts just so you can get the attention that you deserve so that people can listen to you. And I can guarantee you, if Auntie Maxine Waters were a man, this would have never happened.
Kelly, I want to come to you because that introduces an interesting piece, because there's also the confluence of gender and race.
And that was
and one of the things I'm curious about, because I'm not saying that Johanna is incorrect there, but I don't seem to think people from the Trump administration hold a great deal of respect for black people either. So what happens when we have that confluence, Kelly?
You get something like this on national television and C-SPAN and the like. To Johanna's point, she's black and she's a woman. And we've seen Trump administration officials in front of hearings before, and in which black men are responding and, having that call and response, and they're not respecting him either. So I think it's just a blanket racism that nobody really wants to talk about, but is obviously there. And as usual, Auntie Maxine held her own, and I can't fault her for what she said. She went from reclaiming my time to recover my time, and, what are you going to say?
I wouldn't be so quick I'm so sorry. I wouldn't be so quick to call it racism, in my opinion, right? Because I think for me to call it racism, I'll need a bit more information. But what I can tell you is, it was complete disrespectful, and I
Absolutely.
think her gender played a role. But I wouldn't be so quick.
Do you think her race played a role?
In this case, I don't know. I can't make that conclusion.
I'm sorry, Scott. I want to get to you real quick, but with that comment that invited some questions that follow up. What information do you have that makes the gender obvious, that you think that caused a reason for the disrespect, but not so much the race?
Because for us to say that it was racism, we have to know more about him. Like I said, he intentionally reacted to her because of the color of her skin. And I don't have enough information about the secretary, but what I can tell you is that his interaction with Congresswoman Maxine Waters was indeed disrespectful, and I think gender played a role, but I would not be so quick to say race played a role.
You know, it's interesting. It's easy to call it the race issue, and I think it does have to do with race and sex. But the reality is it also has to do with how the Trump administration views the Democrats. They take on his personality. And so not only Mnuchin, who, when you unpack it, was very disrespectful. He wanted to tell her how to run the hearing with the gavel. He made fun of it, and then they had the tete-a-tete. But this was, you could see his white privilege. He had a very important meeting. More important than being here with a committee that has oversight over his funding and budget. He didn't think so much of her or her hearing as a Democrat, at least, than he did for his hearing meeting with a foreign dignitary. That's the first thing. But you see it across the board. The former Attorney General, who was acting Attorney General, in the hearing before the House Judiciary Committee with Nadler. This goes back to kind of your race issue. Nadler is white and Jewish, and he told Nadler that I think his time was up, that Nadler's time was up, so therefore he didn't have to answer any more questions. It is an overall view of the Republicans, the GOP, and the White House not to respect the Democrats or have any decorum whatsoever, and that's not good for America, whether you're black, white, yellow, or brown.
Reverend Joseph Lowery often says that when America stubs its toe, black America breaks its foot. And so the Trump administration seemingly demonstrates a hostility to Democrats, let alone black Democrats, let alone black women Democrats. But that's not where their hostility ends. It's getting to be a disturbing pattern that a number of Trump nominees have refused to say that the 1954 landmark Supreme Court decision on school segregation, Brown versus the Board of Education, is settled law. Now you hear that and you wonder, what does settled law mean? Settled law means the Supreme Court should never, ever consider overturning a decision like Brown. One such nominee who felt this way is current Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Another, now confirmed federal district judge, Wendy Vitter. Now here comes Trump's nominee to be the second in command at the United States Department of Justice, Jeffrey Rosen. He was asked about it today at a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee by a Connecticut Democrat, Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Brown versus Board of Education correctly decided.
Senator, I don't think that it would be a productive exercise for me to go through the most thousands of Supreme Court opinions and say which ones are right and which ones are wrong.
These are pretty simple questions. They're answerable by yes or no. Most lawyers, I suspect, would agree, based on knowledge of the law, that these two cases, pillars of our jurisprudence, were correctly decided by the United States Supreme Court.
I have views about lots of Supreme Court cases, but I'm not being nominated for this position to be the Solicitor General nor a judge. And I think in this context, the point I'm trying to make is that whatever the law is, whether it's the decision I would favor or disfavor, I see it as the role of the Department of Justice to uphold the law such as it is, unless Congress or the courts change it.
Well, just for the record, so we all understand, you're not nominated to be Solicitor General, but he or she reports to you, correct? So you are in charge of the arguments that are made to the Supreme Court. You would be in a position to suggest that the Solicitor General argue that Roe v. Wade should be overruled. That's why I'm asking you this question. Same with Brown versus Board of Education. And, we're entitled to know your personal views.
Scott, I'm going to start with you. You're a lawyer. You have all the legal experience of any of us on the podium here. One, should someone should someone disclose their personal views on long-held statutes such as Roe v. Wade and Brown v. Board? That's the first question. And the second part of it is, if their opinion goes against what is the Supreme Court precedent that we now think to be just decent humanity,
right?
What does that mean about them holding office?
I can tell you that every lawyer who's ever litigated or done appellate arguments has an opinion on the ultimate decision. Yes, Roe v. Wade was decided correctly. Yes, Brown versus Board of Education was decided correctly. Could have struck down segregation in our education system, and we knew that separate but equal in the education system simply wasn't functioning and wasn't right. And so both of those were decided correctly. Lawyers disagree with decisions all the time. The reason Rosen's avoidance of that is so important is because as the number 2 in justice, you run the DOJ, Department of Justice, on a day-to-day basis. And if you do that, you do decide what positions DOJ takes. So, for example, if there's a case that's going to challenge Roe v. Wade, DOJ has to decide whether it is going to defend settled law that has been in place for quite some time, and by majority judicial and legal standards, people accept it as the right decision. Then if DOJ is going to take an opposite position and ask for the Supreme Court to overturn it, or Brown versus Board of Education, the number 2 as well as the Attorney General have a lot of say-so in that policy decision as well as that legal decision. And so many of the appointees in the Federal Circuit and Federal Court have been avoiding this. But the reality is a better answer for them, even if they're conservative, even if they want it all overturned, is that the parts of these decisions that could be challenged are X, Y, and Z, and it's up for debate. I may not agree with them, but here's the thing. It is settled law, and I will defend it. I don't agree with punishment, cruel and unusual punishment where people, the death penalty, for example. But if I'm a prosecutor and that's the law, I'm going to defend it to the height. And we have many federal and state prosecutors who've taken that position after being elected to be prosecutors or leaders in the criminal justice field.
Kelly, what's the communication strategy here in being evasive? If you're against it, you're trying to tell your base, hey, we're looking to overturn it. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But if you're supportive of it, you don't want to throw off your base and get them turned off before a presumed presidential election. Why not just be honest with the American public and his base at that point?
I mean, well, that's not anybody in the Trump administration's MO, honesty. So I'm not expecting that at all. The bar has been set so low for this administration. You know, the bar has been set so low. I really don't expect much from this administration. But I do want to note, to Scott's point, how when it comes to decision-making, specifically with the DOJ, how definitive their answers typically are. But something that I wanted to point out that Rosen did say, he said, quote, whatever the law is, whether it's a decision I would favor or disfavor, I see it as the role of DOJ to uphold the law such as it is unless Congress or the courts change it. So he kind of removed any power that the DOJ could have in that statement. I'm not saying he's going to uphold it. I'm not saying that he's not going to lie, because he might. But for it to be under oath, for him to say this at a hearing, he basically said that he's not going to touch this because Congress or the courts aren't going to touch it.
And in fact, Scott, before I let you get in, I want to hear from Joanna for 1 second, because I want to get to her because you haven't heard from her yet. Your thoughts on this?
My thought on this is, so it's been over 60 years since Brown versus Board of Education, the ruling of it, right, of this particular court case, which is instrumental, one of our landmark cases in America's jurisprudence. My concern is 60 years after, right, we are dealing with some dire situations when it comes to the education of black and brown babies in America. Our schools are still highly segregated. That's just the reality of it. And our schools for black and brown babies are still underfunded. And there are a lot of issues that would require the assistance of the Justice Department to take on. So if you have someone as Mr. Rosen, who refuses to take a position, it's kind of questionable. When something does happen, how is the Justice Department going to deal with it? And I'm highly concerned, because the education of our black and brown babies is a huge concern of mine. It should be a concern of all Americans.
I think so, but let me show your viewers, all of us, why this makes a difference and why this is a big deal. In Texas 3 months ago, the state of Texas challenged Obamacare, or the American Health Care Act, right? And so the judge went further in his opinion and said none of the American Health Care Act could be enforceable, which was far beyond what DOJ, the government, had argued in their brief papers and in their oral argument. They had argued that parts of it were unconstitutional, but that the other part, like pre-existing conditions, should stay in play. Now, when the judge's decision came forth, DOJ was ecstatic because now they had an opening in the federal district court judge that was going to strike it down completely. A month or two later, a couple weeks ago, they then, in further briefings on the case, they argued that they supported now the complete evisceration of Obamacare simply because this federal judge, who was a Trump appointee, and so from a policy standpoint, legal position standpoint, DOJ changed their position simply because of this judge's decision, a preliminary decision. Now, having said that, number two, number one, and the senior people at DOJ made that strategic decision. That's why him not answering that question is relevant, probative, and material to whether he should get appointed or not.
And that's why Kelly's addition to the conversation about I'm only going to abide by what the courts and Congress say, because if you move out of the way and allow courts to change things, then you can reverse course yourself. As if you guys haven't had enough of white men testifying on Capitol Hill so far. There were another hearing today before Congresswoman Waters' Financial Services Committee, where she got the CEOs of 7 large global banks to appear before the committee. Here they are. Take a look. Now, do you notice anything about them? Anything at all? Just take a look. Anything at all? Yep. All white men. Congressman Al Green of Texas asked them a question. How many of them thought they would be succeeded by a woman or a person of color? Not one raised his hand. When asked if it would happen in the next decade, 5 out of the 7 raised their hand. So much for that. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll update you on the great T-Mobile go-go fight in D.C. And there's great video to show you of a tribute to the retiring NBA star, Dwayne Wade.
You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.
And now, a word from one of our partners. You have plenty of pictures in your home, but you've never seen anything like this before. Introducing Easy Tiles, the world's first photo tiles made of sleek and ultra lightweight glass. Easy Tiles makes it super simple. You use their exclusive app for iPhone or Android to upload as many photos as you like. Then they print them on tempered glass. Your order arrives on your doorstep in just days. And that's when the real fun begins. Because with Easy Tiles, you'll transform your living space with a gallery wall that will amaze each and every guest. Easy Tiles are even simple to hang. No hammer, no nails. And because they're mounted on small risers, they appear to float on your wall. Easy to order, easy to hang, and guaranteed for life. Now you can save 30% on any size order, plus get free shipping on orders of 4 or more. Just download the free Easy Tiles app at easytiles.com and turn your best memories into beautiful glass wall art. Plus, save big now with this special TV offer. Again, that's easytiles.com.
Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered, the blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play.
Nipsey Hussle's mother, Angelique, shared some words of encouragement as she reflects on her son and his unfortunate demise.
I have perfect peace and I have strength and I want to lift you up. Please do not stay down. Do not stay stuck.
Many of them are stuck.
Do not mourn because Nipsey is great.
He is the great.
He is the great. And now he is even greater.
Yes, he is.
Because he has no bounds and no limits. His energy is everywhere. He can touch. He's there with you now, and he's here with me now.
That's true. That's
and
true.
please be encouraged. Please be encouraged. He was beautiful. He did not look scary. He did not look like he was shot. None of that. None of the trauma, the way that he left this earth, none of that showed on his face. He looked like a radiant, clean, beautiful
light being.
Light being.
Yes.
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 Tickets to a memorial service tomorrow for Hustle at the 21,000-seat Staples Center in Los Angeles sold out within 40 minutes. Rest in peace, Nipsey Hussle. And we have an update for you on the Metro PCS store located in D.C. that has been asked to stop playing go-go music. For days, the community has been protesting the decision by playing go-go music in front of the store, and more recently, go-go bands have performed outside of the store. Here's a video of one band chanting, "Don't mute D.C." That's video from a rally that took place on the corner of 14th and U. I tell you, the panel's up here laughing, but I tell you, anything that beats on the 2 and the 4, you're going to find me stepping to it. Anything. Now, John Ledger, the CEO of T-Mobile, which owns Metro PCS, he stepped in and tweeted a statement on the issue. He tweets, quote, "I've looked into this issue myself, and the music should not stop in D.C. T-Mobile and Metro PCS are proud to be a part of the Shaw community. The music will go on, and our dealer will work with neighbors to compromise volume." As anybody who watches this program knows, activism works. Let's go to our panel about that for a second. Kelly, you were bopping just as long as hard with me when you heard that. When you saw the video and you heard the music, what did it make you feel?
It made me feel like I was home because I grew up here, and that corner is just quintessential go-go. Like, I've never been there during the day where it hasn't been playing. So for somebody who's not from here, doesn't know our culture, doesn't know anything about DC, to come in and basically just try and change something for their benefit without regard to the community at large, it's just insulting, because it's not about whether you're moving here. Nobody cares where you move. It's you're changing something that didn't belong to you in the first place. So that's what the reaction from my community was doing, what we were talking about. And I am just kind of upset that I missed it by just like an hour yesterday.
You want to go out there?
You want to be out there bopping?
Of course I was.
Scott,
let me tell you something. When I was a young partner, senior associate, I represented Warren Williams Sr. and Jr., and they owned the Club U, right there at 14th and U in the government building. And they had lots of legal challenges, and just generally by being in a government building. But some of the best times and some of the greatest artists of our time, hip-hop and rap, played there, including Tupac and Biggie and others, when they weren't really big stars. And so that brought back a lot of great memories. Here's the deal, too, but you got to keep in mind the politics of this. T-Mobile is in what? Merger acquisition discussions right now with another mobile organization. I can't remember who they're trying to combine with, right? And so they're under scrutiny from DOJ, and obviously the state attorney generals across the country will be looking at that merger/acquisition to figure out whether they're going to sign off on it or approve it or not. And so why pick a fight with one of the largest group of your users, African Americans and brown people, use more T-Mobile phones from a customer base than any other group? Why pick that fight on something as essentially ethnic and hometown as D.C. as the go-go?
Absolutely. And to your point, Scott, I believe they're merging with Sprint, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
and to your point, Kelly, that strip is on the corner of 7th and Florida Avenue. And as a Howard University alum,
well, it looked like
walking
14th.
Yeah, no, that video was from 14th and U.
Okay.
The actual store is on 7th and Florida.
Okay.
And so as a Howard alum, when you get off the metro and you walk toward the university, you know you're back for homecoming when you can hear the go-go. When you can hear the go-go. Speaking of Florida, their amendment down in the state of Florida, Amendment 4, which restored voting rights to 1.4 million formerly incarcerated felons, is still under attack by Republican legislators there. Even though the amendment to the Florida Constitution was specifically written to keep the legislature out of implementation, the measure there passed with 64.5% of the vote. Now, for some good news. The Florida Senate committee working on implementation is not demanding that all fines and court costs be paid before voting rights are restored. However, their Florida House committee there that is working on it is demanding that payment. Those payments could total billions of dollars, and so some progress here, but the fight is not over in Florida. On the federal level, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland introduced the Democracy Restoration Act of 2019 this week. The bill will restore federal voting rights to all Americans with felony convictions as soon as they're released from prison. Here to talk about that with us is Connor Maxwell, race and ethnicity policy analyst at the Center for American Progress. Connor, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry I'm here instead of Roland. I'm sure you're probably looking forward to it, but I hope we have the good conversation nonetheless. What does the senator's bill ultimately do for so many formerly incarcerated citizens?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I think the right place to start is Senator Cardin's bill would solve exactly the sorts of problems that we're seeing coming out of Florida, right? Beginning with carve-outs. In Amendment 4, there were specific carve-outs for offenses, and there was a lack of clarity or a perceived lack of clarity from Governor DeSantis about how it should be implemented. And he took advantage of that situation in order to disenfranchise as many people, black people, as he possibly could. So Senator Cardin's bill would restore voting rights to vote in federal elections to anyone with a prior felony conviction immediately upon release from prison. And that's really important because this is, we all know research shows voting is an important tool for reentry. It's supported by law enforcement. The American Probation and Parole Association is extremely supportive of this bill and of restoring voting rights. So it's the right step forward. More than 10 senators already support it.
We already know that voter suppression is huge. It played a huge role in 2016, and we expect that it'll play a huge role moving forward. What degree of optimism should any of us have that other Republicans who sign on, both on the state level and federal level, for different degrees of voter suppression, what degree of optimism should we have that they'll then be supportive of this legislation?
Sure. Well, I always try and stay optimistic. But what I'll say is that voter restoration is supported by Democrats and Republicans. And we saw that in Florida this year. 65% of voters supported this, over 3 million votes cast in support. And so you do see bipartisan support. You saw the ACLU and the Koch brothers coming together in Florida to get this thing done. What you're seeing is a cadre of far-right lawmakers in the Florida legislature disregarding the will of their own constituents and moving forward in order to suppress voters and keep their own seats. That's exactly what we're seeing here. That's disappointing, but I think as a whole, we're moving forward in the right direction.
What are some next steps that we need to see in order to see this bill introduced by the senator really come to fruition? And then again, it has to be signed by Donald Trump. What optimism do we have of that? Even the most optimistic person like yourself.
Yeah. Well, what's nice is that there are 14 states across the country that already restore voting rights to people immediately upon release from prison. I'm hopeful that all the senators from those states will get behind this bill, and then we'll go talk to the president and explain to him why this is so essential for our democracy. Because quite frankly, in the United States of America, a U.S. citizen's voting rights should not depend on the state in which they reside.
That's a great point. I'm going to turn to our panel here. And Scott, I want to get your thoughts on this conversation we're having with Connor.
As you listen to this story to the viewing audience, the history of taking away the vote of a felon is rooted in the Jim Crow era and in the South, right? And it was historical to keep people of color, freed slaves and the majority of African Americans who lived in the South at that time and still do, to not be able to vote so that the Republicans or Democrats, white men, could get reelected. It's 2019 right now. Does that sound familiar? And so there's really no real basis. There's no relationship between whether I've been convicted of a felon and whether I have a right to vote, if you think about it. There's none. Name me the top 3 reasons, legitimate reasons, why I should not vote because I committed a felony or crime. There really isn't. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a second-class citizen if I can't vote. If I did my time already and I'm out, right? I can't vote while you're in prison. It'd be too impractical. But now that I'm out, okay, now that I'm out, why can't I vote? And so many states, something like 35, maybe more, still have, including Washington, D.C., although I think I think it's, I may be wrong about that. They under certain circumstances, the individuals who have been away can come back and can vote. Can vote under certain circumstances. But remember, the bottom line is there's no causal connection, no logical connection between whether you committed a crime and get out and your right to vote. It's illogical.
Joanna, we were talking about this question of voting, and voter suppression even comes up again because as optimistic as Connor is, and he's rightful to be so, right? I really have a hard time seeing the overwhelming efforts in North Carolina, seeing the overwhelming efforts in Florida, the overwhelming efforts in Wisconsin, those states that helped decide the 2016 election for the president. For me to now think that there's going to be a kumbaya moment where people come together and want to give retroactive voting rights to those who are formerly incarcerated. Where do you fall, and where does your analysis of voter suppression lead you to think this will end up?
Very good question. As my co-panelists, both of them have said, voting is a fundamental right? Because if you don't have a choice to vote, you can't voice your concerns. You can't voice your issues, right? But we live in a society where, unfortunately, as optimistic as I would like to be, but do we really think we're moving in a direction where the U.S. government will allow people who have committed crimes to give them back their right to vote, right? Do we really think we are in that place in America? I would like to say some states we are in that place, but as a country as a whole, I don't think we are, because the reality, the fact of the matter is, if every person in America were to vote, we would never have a Republican in office, right? So vote suppression, we would never have a Republican in office. That's just the reality of it.
I'm not so sure about that.
You would disagree?
Yeah. Well, and if again, I'm going to pause for a second and come to Kelly for a second. And the reason why I would say that is because we just talked earlier about the Southern strategy. And there are a number of folks who see that anything that government does benefits black people, and now that conversation has expanded to people of color and immigrants of the sort. And so there are a number of people who are willing to cut off their own metaphorical nose to spite their face. And I know that's probably something you want to respond to, but I want to get to Kelly. I promise I'll come back to you. Kelly, we're talking about this question of voter suppression, and we're beating up on poor Connor by lambasting the idea of being optimistic. Right. But what's your read on it? Are you hopeful that something good can come of this?
I mean, naturally, I'm an optimistic person. Realistically, I understand that we are in a Trump administration presidency. So
2021.
Hey.
2021.
January 2021.
I'm keeping hope alive. However, and I had a conversation with some colleagues about this earlier, whether Trump is going to win in 2020 is up for debate as well. So, my thoughts on that later. But regarding specifically voting rights for, former felons, I think it has to tie in with the prison reform as a whole, right? Because you have to think about, we're trying to rehabilitate that as well. So this is a component of that, because like my co-panelists were saying, they're second-class citizens until they get their right to vote back. And honestly, we don't know whether they're going to vote Democrat if they get their rights back anyway.
Right. There's no presumption of that. Give me 1 second, Scott, before we go there. Connor, I want to come back to you. Yeah. Let's get inside the weeds of this for just 1 second. Although Senator Cardin has introduced this legislation, and you talked about the various states that already have something on the books that are akin to it, where are the committees that this is going to have to go through? Who are the senators on that committee that folks need to be paying attention to?
Sure. So this bill will go through the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is led by Senator Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham has sort of gone off the rails.
Well, there it is.
and there goes our optimism.
In the past, he has supported some reforms, and hopefully we can get a hearing on this and we can talk through these issues. Because as some of your panelists have said, disenfranchising people for crimes they committed in the past, there's no basis for that. There's no reason for that. There's no public safety reason for that. And these people are eligible to pay federal taxes. They should be eligible to vote in federal elections. So your panelists are absolutely right. The odds are steep, and perhaps this won't be accomplished this Congress or even the next Congress. But I think in general, we're moving in the right direction on this issue of voter restoration.
There's a group in the House called the Justice Dems. Is there anyone out of that organization, that group of congresspersons, that are carrying the water on this particular legislation on the House side?
So that's a fascinating question, and some of your viewers might be interested to know this. While this bill does exist as a standalone, and it's held by, it's been introduced by Chairman Gerald Nadler, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. This provision actually already passed the House of Representatives. It was folded into H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and so it already passed. Every single Democratic member voted for this policy and is supportive of it. And so we're hoping that our counterparts in the Senate will be able to get this done.
Scott, you had to chime in.
Real quick. So here's the reason. Here are two reasons to be optimistic. You're right. It may not be this Congress. It may be the next Congress. The Senate in 2020, several seats are up. And many pollsters and political analysts believe that the Dems have a real shot at taking over the Senate and holding the House. That's one thing. Second of all, depending on the demographics, depending on the reports that you see and the Pew Trust analysis and foundation reports, people of color are going to be the majority of this country, whether it's 10 years or 20 years from now. I got to believe that those people who have suffered because of this litmus test, if you will, for voting are going to come out in strong support of it and look for the demographics and look for the people, the change in the Senate and the House to become more diverse. And when you get that diversity, short-term, long-term, then this issue bubbles to the top and has a tremendous chance of passing. It's the right thing to do.
I'll remind Roland in some years after now that Johanna and Scott both gave the James Carville prediction that 50 years in the wilderness for Republicans because Democrats will be the ones that'll be moving on.
I dream about it. I'm sorry.
Connor, we thank you so much. Is there anything real quick before you get out here, anything folks can do to help push this along, any kind of contact to their legislatures that you would advocate for?
So what I'll say is educate as many people as you know about this issue. A lot of folks don't realize that that their neighbors, their cousins, aren't allowed to vote because of something that they were convicted of in the past. And so public education is the most important part of this. Obviously, you know, democracy is key here. Voting, contacting your lawmakers, and making it clear that voting is a fundamental right in this country, and they need to stand up for it.
Absolutely. Connor, thank you so much for your time and attention on this. We'll be sure to pay attention, and I'm sure that when Roland comes back, he'll be all over this. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with more of great Dwayne Wade video.
There is no shortcut to utopia. Writer Claude McKay.
For today's HBCU Giving Day, the school is Dillard University. Dillard University is located in New Orleans, Louisiana, and was founded in 1869. Notable alumni from that great institution include Andrew Young, Garrett Morris, Ruth Simmons, Carl E. Stewart, and many, many more. To donate to Dillard and keep one of our bedrock HBCU institutions alive and thriving, please visit www.dillard.edu. Again, that's www.dillard.edu. Calling all HBCU alumni. That's me, Scott. I know you're one as well. Yeah, all the HBCU alumni in the house. Yeah, we deep in here today. Calling all the HBCU alumni, students, and leaders. Enter the Ford Motor Company HBCU Mobility Challenge and win $25,000 for your school. Building on their long-term support of HBCUs, Ford is looking to improve mobility in HBCU communities through innovative solutions. The winning program will receive a grant of up to $25,000 to implement their proposal. The deadline to apply has been extended to April 15th, 2019, tax day. Get the Ford application in and your taxes at the same time. Go to fgb.life. Again, F as in Frank, G as in girl, B as in boy, .life for more info. And to apply, Ford goes further in our community. Monday night was the Miami Heat Dwayne Wade's last home game. In typical D-Wade form, he scored 30 points off the bench. Now he's retiring after this season, and the send-offs around the league have been many and heartfelt. But this one video from Budweiser focuses on the man off the court and has drawn millions of views and even more tears. Take a look.
I have no idea who's coming. Like, literally, no idea. Hello.
Hi, Dwayne. Hello.
Hello. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good, and yourself? It's been about 12 years since I last seen you. I come from an area where not too many people make it.
It was always my dream that I'd get the chance to go to college, but we just didn't have the money.
You mean so much to us, and my brother Joaquin loved you from the beginning. He passed away in Parkland on February 14th. He was one of the 17 victims.
10 days before Christmas, our house burned down and we lost everything. It was one of the lowest points in my life.
Hey, Dwight.
How you doing, Mom?
You were the joy of my life, but I was dropping the ball. That day that I just couldn't do it no more was the day that I was gonna have to turn myself in. And I seen the tears just fall from your eyes. Your mama went down a road, Dwayne, that I didn't ever think I'd come back from. But on that road, I noticed you kept showing up. And you'll come and see about me. And Dwayne, because you believe in me. When I got out of prison, I was a different woman.
We received a phone call. Would you mind if Dwayne Wade take you and the family on a shopping spree? It just meant the world to me that you were there for us at this time.
Thank you.
You became our hero.
A lot of the words that you said hit a spark and kind of changed where I was going.
Without you and your full tuition scholarship, none of this would have been possible.
You're not Wade, the basketball player, the legend. You're the human being that took the time and on his own wrote my brother's name on his shoe, and you cared.
When you bought your mama that church, you don't even understand the lives that you changed. So I don't have a jersey, but I brought you this.
I don't have a jersey to trade with you, but I definitely have this, the blazer that I wore to my first job interview.
My cap and gown from graduation.
This is important because Joaquin wore this in his last championship. My family wanted you to have it.
Please don't forget my brother, Joaquin. Having you as a role model has made all the difference.
One of the special robes that you gave me, purple symbolized royalty. And you are royal in everybody's life that you've touched.
You completely changed the course of my life.
I know my brother is with you always.
It wouldn't have been possible to be here if it wasn't for you.
I am more proud of the man you have become than the basketball player. You are bigger than basketball.
With a person who's so accomplished in the game of basketball, it is hard to imagine that he could be even that much greater as a person. The thing that struck me so much about that particular clip was that it were so many different and unique ways that he reached out into people's lives. Tons of athletes have foundations. They may hand out turkeys at Thanksgiving. They may do things like that, a couple of gifts at Christmas, just something that they can do. Sometimes even just to use it as a tax write-off, to be completely honest. But the myriad of ways that Dwayne Wade affected everyone's life was just so it moves you in such intimate and deep and personal ways. Johanna, did it do the same for you?
Absolutely, and I think that historically, America has done a very good job in terms of the media portraying men of color, people of color in general, in such a negative light, right? So for us to see this video of a man who is so much greater than life, right, who is well accomplished, but yet he could just focus on himself and his family, but instead he has given so much to humanity and so much to others. And I think that's what it's about at the end of the day. I don't care how much money you've made, how many degrees that you've attained. The question to you is, what have you done to make the lives of other people better? And Dwayne Wade has done that. He has made an impact in the lives of millions of people all across the globe.
Kelly.
I mean, it shows you just how holistic he is. He's not just a basketball player. He's not just a celebrity. He's a well-rounded human being, a compassionate human being who not only takes the time for strangers, but you saw his mother in there, his family. I also saw over the weekend his son came out as gay. You know, I think his son's maybe like 11 or so. That's a very hard thing to do for anybody, let alone a young black man, black boy, frankly, at the age of 11, right? And we still have this stigma in our culture, not just black culture, but the culture at large, where we don't necessarily trust what our children say when it comes to their own sexuality, right? And the fact that Dwayne Wade actually, you know, said, hey, you know, not even congratulations, but he was like, I wish I was there.
Yeah,
and his wife, Gabrielle Union, was there. There was an entire village around this little boy. His oldest son was there. His stepmom was there. Everybody was there supporting this little boy, and that's what we should be doing for everybody.
Absolutely. Scott, when you see that, you talked to us while we were watching the video, that, man, you're going to hold the tears because you've already let him out when you saw that.
That's right.
But when you saw it the first time, what ran through your mind?
I thought about my mother, who's no longer with us, who passed away at 57. And I thought about two things she used to say all the time. One, she used to say, if you're not living a life of service, you essentially only living half of your life. You can go make as much money as you want. You can go do X, Y, and Z. But if you're not giving back to the community to make it better, you're only living 50% of your life. The second thing, I used to say at her funeral, I said, you know, I learned how to be a man from my father, who was one of the strongest men I've ever known. But my mother narrated my journey to manhood. And when I looked at that video, I thought how ironic that his mother wasn't there. But she said one thing that just really resonated in the opposite of what I just said. And that was, she said, when I turned myself in and went to jail, I had a long journey back. She said, but you kept showing up. He narrated her journey back, and yet he's become this iconic, not just basketball figure, but humanitarian figure. And then lastly, what I thought was, this is a great video, yes, but I guarantee you, there are strong black men like you and me, other athletes, other people who are just working day-to-day, government workers, private sector, public sector, who are in the grind, taking care of their families, and are huge humanitarians, but they don't have an 8-10-minute video made. And that gets to your point about how we are stigmatized, how we are viewed, and how we are presented in media, when the reality is, most of the people, as one police officer told me when I was a prosecutor in New York, and we were doing Harlem, and we did the write-outs in Harlem, he said, the problem with Harlem is 10% of the people here do 100% of the crime. The other 90% are good, hard-working people paying their taxes, want good schools, want good health care. And we don't have that story told in the media, which is why Roland Martin Unfiltered, and we need more programs like this. I know Roland would welcome more programs like this. So it wouldn't be a necessity. We need more programs like that because our stories need to be demystified, but also they need to be told in powerful and heroic ways.
That's wonderfully put. That's very well said. And we're going to leave the conversation and ostensibly our show there. Kelly, Scott, Johanna, thank you so much for riding with me here as I filled in as the captain on the ship this time. And thank you all for watching, whether you watch with us live or whether you're watching on delay. We're grateful that you're here with us. That's it for this edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'm Ray Baker in for Roland. Roland, enjoy yourself on the Tom Joyner Morning Show cruise. In parting, let us remember the words of the Yoruba proverb, that if we stand tall, it is because we stand on the backs of those who came before us. God bless.
Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered, the blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.